All right, thank you for that. Now, on the expedition relating to the cemetery there that you went on in Egypt, can you share anything with us? What you find, things like that?
Yeah, so you're talking about the book that came out, the Phoebe Hearst expedition to Naga.
Yeah.
So that book, which is available for free online, if anyone would like to download it, that is not archaeology work that I carried out. So those excavations, it was two cemeteries that we published. And those excavations actually happened between 1903 and 1905 by an American archaeologist and Egyptologist. And what happened was he did those excavations, he directed them in Egypt, and sent back to the United States the finds that he could send back. Many of the finds stayed in Egypt. But at that time, his work was being funded by a woman who was a wealthy woman based in California. Her name was Phoebe Hearst. And she wanted to start a museum in Northern California that would have examples of ancient cultures from all over the world. And so he was sort of the person supplying her with artifacts from the Nile Valley, but she funded archaeological expeditions elsewhere in the world that other people directed. So from these excavations he did between 1903 and 1905, he sent back some of the artifacts so that she could put them in her museum. And this museum now exists today. It's called the Hearst Museum, and it is on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. So when I was living out there about 7 or 8 years ago, I started this research project to publish these artifacts because he excavated them and then they never were published. And so I put together this whole team. It was a great group of people. There were about 12 or 13 of us in total from all over the world. So there were some students who were undergraduates at the University of California, Berkeley, some graduate students there. There were researchers from different places in the US. I brought in a world famous bead expert, my friend Yolanda Bos, who lives in the Netherlands. She is an expert on Egyptian beads. And there were a lot of beads from these two cemeteries. So I brought her to Berkeley to teach me what she knows about beads and to look at some of these artifacts with me. We spent a week together. And I learned everything I could from her, and she gave me all sorts of advice about the project, and we co-wrote the chapter on beads together. It was wonderful to work with her. So each person on my research team took a different subset of these artifacts, right? One person was working on the ceramic pots. One person was working on alabaster, little stone jars. So we each had different object groups that we worked on. Each person wrote a chapter. We put them together into this book. And so now there is a publication of these artifacts that had been excavated over 100 years ago and just had never gotten the chance to be published.
That's beautiful. And of course, you did make mention of the fact that it's available on Amazon, right? Am I correct on that?
It's not on Amazon. It is, the publisher is Brill. It's a publisher based in the Netherlands, and it's available on their website for free. It's open access, so anyone can download the entire book.
There's something I was going through just now. Let me try to see if I can get a copy of it to read for you. Maybe about you, or maybe you have written in. I'm writing a book on conversation between white Egyptologists who held university positions in the US and Europe, and scholars of African descent in the US, so that the voices of Black scholars will become integrated into Egyptology's disciplinary history. Can you say anything about that?
Yes. So this is the project I mentioned that I've been working on for 6 or 7 or 8 years now. What happened was I was teaching in California, and I came across an editorial that Marcus Garvey wrote, where he was criticizing the professor of Egyptology at Harvard. And this editorial was from the early 1920s. And I was so surprised because I knew who Marcus Garvey was. I had no idea that he knew anything about what a professor at Harvard was saying about ancient Egyptians. And I found this fascinating. And I talked to my students about it in class one day, and they were so excited about this information and so interested. And they kept, asking me questions, and we're talking about all this, and class is over, and they wouldn't leave the room because they were so excited. And the next class was trying to come in. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, this is really good material. This makes the study of these ancient cultures relevant to people today. I mean, here's Marcus Garvey making it relevant for his readers in the 1920s. And here are my students in a classroom still seeing that relevance. So I thought, I need to do some more research on this. I need to find out what else was going on at that time. And I just sort of picked a name out of air. I was like, okay, Du Bois. He was a prominent African-American intellectual at that time. I wonder if he knew anything about Egyptology. And I started doing some research, and sure enough, I find out that Du Bois was exchanging letters around 1912 with a British archaeologist named Flinders Petrie. And this sort of blew my mind because I didn't know this. No Egyptologists I knew this. There are books written about Du Bois. There are books written about Flinders Petrie. Neither of them are really mentioning this. And yet this snippet of history, these letters that they exchanged, that's huge for Egyptology. And so I started to dig into that story and understand their relationship and sort of built it out a little. And I published an article on that. I've published an article on the Marcus Garvey editorial. And then in doing that research, I learned that his wife, Amy Jakes Garvey, also wrote an editorial that talks about the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, which was happening right at that time in the early 1920s. So I have an article on both of their engagements with Egyptology. Pauline Hopkins, who I mentioned, the editor and writer who wrote this fabulous book. And the story in the book involves an archaeological expedition going to Sudan. And they're talking about the archaeology of the ancient Nile Valley. And then there's sort of a twist in the story where it becomes almost like the Black Panther movie, where the main character finds this hidden city in Sudan that is peopled. The residents of it are descendants of the ancient people of Meroe. And they're this, wonderfully advanced culture. And they teach him about their culture, and they talk about his culture. He's from Boston, so they talk about life in the US. And Pauline Hopkins, it's a novel that she wrote, but she was pulling on all these history books, all these Egyptology books, to construct this story and to write the dialogue that her characters had with one another. So she was building history into her novel. And I know that she was doing that intentionally because a different book that she wrote talks about the importance of teaching history and how all these sort of pedagogical techniques for teaching history and how you can teach it through literature. So she absolutely was intentionally teaching history through this novel. So I have an article out about her. And right now, the one I'm working on is an article about Booker T. Washington, who I didn't know this, but had a close relationship with the president of the University of Chicago. University of Chicago is where I got my PhD. So the president of the University of Chicago in the early 20th century was a man named William Rainey Harper. And he and Booker T. Washington had a close professional relationship. And William Rainey Harper would invite Booker T. Washington to campus to give talks. He invited him to give a talk in Chicago to the public to celebrate the end of the Spanish-American War. And during that time in the early 20th century, Booker T. Washington exchanged letters with the Egyptologist at the University of Chicago, a man named James Henry Breasted. And so that's another facet of the history of Egyptology that Egyptologists aren't taught because nobody knew about it. This sort of had been lost to history. So I'm trying to flesh out all of these conversations, all of these letters that were exchanged, the writings that scholars of African descent in the US were doing about these ancient Nile Valley cultures to show the importance of these cultures to African American history and to show the engagement of those Black intellectuals with Nile Valley cultures. So all of these things that I'm writing, you can, well, most of them are free. You can download them from my website, which is on academia.edu. Most of those articles are accessible there.